I use a therapist to help me unravel the past, and I don't have I'm not heavily impacted by my past in like a, where I'm in a bad state of being. But it's more just like, oh, that's where that comes from. And we talked about in the beginning, like that scarcity mindset that I started out with. The early youth, the significance of what happens to you in your youth before age 18, the studies behind that are significant. And we know about these adverse childhood experiences as being really detrimental to our physical health and our mental health in adulthood, even though they happened to us when we were kids. And so I think you've got to figure out how much time you need to invest in that to basically get out of your own way and live a happy life.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Anthony Poponi to chat about the power of positive psychology. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote comes from Don Miguel Ruiz. The human mind is like a fertile ground where seeds are continually being planted. The seeds are opinions, ideas, and concepts. You plant a seed, a thought, and it grows. The word is like a seed, and the human mind is so fertile. The only problem is that too often it is fertile for the seeds of fear. Every human mind is fertile, but only for those kinds of seeds it is prepared for. What is important is to see which kind of seeds our mind is fertile for, and to prepare it to receive the seeds of love. What are you planting in the garden of your mind? Is it positive, negative, fear, greed, love, hate, peace, or anger? Today, we're going to chat about happiness and positive psychology and planting those positive seeds. We'll share practical tips on how you can experience more of it in your life. When you take the time to understand why and how you're reacting to life, you have the opportunity to reprogram yourself. If you know what you want the program and outcomes to look like, it's even better because you can reverse engineer your way to being happier. It's never going to be perfect because we are human, but we can make it better. First, you need to decide what you want. What kind of seeds are you creating the environment for? And then figure out the programming that's holding you back. Anthony Poponi is the CEO and founder of Focus on the 40 and is an expert in positive psychology, the applied science of happiness. He travels the country speaking at conferences and holding workplace workshops to bring out the best in team cultures. His mission is to inspire joy and fulfillment by creating cohesive teams who are ready to go from good to great. He is in Bend, Oregon, home for 2 years, and when he's home, he likes to play outside. He does improv and stand-up comedy, and he serves on the board of 2 local nonprofits. Let's meet Anthony. Welcome to Richer Soul, Anthony Poponi. It's great to hear from you today.
Hey, Rocky. Thanks for having me on.
Looking forward to our conversation. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Ooh, I would say school didn't teach me very much at all about money. And my family taught me plenty of lessons about money, and not all of them were great. There's a lot of interesting elements to that. First of all, my parents divorced when I was around 5 years old. And my mom will tell the story. I don't know if it's true or not, but she left my father and she left with three kids, me as the 5-year-old, the oldest, and also the favorite, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And she says she left with a can of Campbell's soup made right there in New Jersey and 3 quarters, 1 quarter for each child. So we immediately or nearly immediately were, bouncing around between houses, and then eventually got into low-income housing, affordable housing. Well, it was really low-income housing. Got onto food stamps, which was the version of, social support back then. And we lived in poverty until I was about 12 years old. And it was hard. It was really hard. And, my mom did something really powerful, really amazing. And she was able to get a Pell Grant from the federal government and was able to use that to get her nursing degree. So she wound up becoming a nurse and finishing her career, and now retired after working her whole career in nursing, finishing with hospice. So she did some really cool stuff and some really hard stuff. But we lived in a scarce environment. And I think that was the thing that my parents always sort of taught me, was that scarcity is the thing. Like, that we always do things as cheap as we can do them, and we can always do them as affordably as we can do them, when we don't spend money on stuff. And of course, that was informed, at least on my dad's side, from his parents, which my paternal grandparents grew up in the Great Depression, and so they had a pantry full of canned food and a pantry full of preserved food and pickles from 1978, just in case, the recession came back around. They'd always have some resources. And so my grandparents were super loving, but they were also very frugal. And, there's a difference between frugality and scarcity mindset, I think. But those are sort of the underpinnings from my youth.
Did something happen? You said till you were about 12. Did something happen at 12? Is that when she got her nursing degree? And
yeah, it was somewhere around that time frame. She met another man, not my father, met another man, got married. And so we went from zero income to my mom having a reasonable living wage income as a new nurse, and then added on his income as well, because they were now a dual income family. So that changed our stars a little bit. We were by no means living high on the hog. It was still, living a lower middle income lifestyle, but it changed the scarcity patterns a lot. We had sufficiency for the first time.
Did that affect you as an adult?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I did a terrible thing. I say terrible thing. I did a wonderful thing by putting most of my professional career into the nonprofit and the public sector, which meant I was making pennies on the dollar compared to all of my friends. But I'm very service driven. I'm very into giving back, and I'm really into helping other people and lifting other people up. But it's really interesting to come from this position of like scarcity mindset and frugality, and then living and working in the nonprofit sector, where frugality and scarcity are a mindset of the nonprofit. Like, it's do more with less. You never invest in things because we just don't have the money. We don't do those things as nonprofits. And so it kind of was like this self-perpetuating cycle of a way of behaving and believing in the workplace that I think also affected how I live too, also because my paychecks were so small working for the nonprofits.
Have you overcome that, or do you still feel you have a scarcity mindset? Or
I would say it's still there, and I would say even like scarcity mindset and imposter syndrome, you can use both of those as leverage, right? You can use both of those. You can harness those, right? And scarcity keeps me going. Scarcity mindset keeps me chasing and moving. I'm an entrepreneur, so I need to be entrepreneurial, and I don't rest on my laurels, and we're not really wired to do that anyway as human beings. And that whole frugality piece, it's still there, and I have to force myself at times to say, hey, this is the frugal decision. Is this the right decision? Is there a time to make investments in what you do and to change how you perceive what you're doing? And changing that mindset around, some of these things take time to show their return on investment. So it's still there. I think I try to tame and tamp down both of those sort of those negative thought patterns in there, just because they have value, but they can be undermining if you let them run the show.
And I think every strength or weakness has its pluses and its minuses.
Sure.
Even strengths can become weaknesses or negativity very quickly, depending on what you're doing with them.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
So the work you were doing in the nonprofits, was that related to positive psychology or did that come later?
That came later. Yeah, my interest in positive psychology is kind of attached to my love of science. And so I have a degree in biology, and I used that degree up until about 2016 as my primary connection to the working world. And then when I found positive psychology, it just spoke to me because of its rigor. I know we both have connections to the Mid-Atlantic and specifically New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And back in the 1990s, the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Martin Seligman was there, and he was foundational in creating this science of human happiness that we call positive psychology. So that really spoke to me. And what spoke to me about it was like that it's so scientific, that it actually comes from like really good research. It's not just pop psychology. It's not just people making up their opinions on what makes us happy. It makes us productive and successful. And then it connected back to the work I'm doing now, because again, I'm service focused. And so here I am able to share these messages of being like, don't do these things because you think they'll make you happy. That's the lie that we get told about some of these things. And so what are some of these decisions that we can make that are better informed by what we really know to be true? And so that's kind of the connection between those two career fields.
So what are some of those lies we're told that will make us happy?
Well, in general, I would say circumstance. That's a big part of it. My business is called Focus on the 40, because about 40% of our happiness is within our control, right? And that's through intentional actions. And I think that's one of the things that, there's this, is happiness a state of being? Well, sure, it can be. It depends on really how you parse out that definition of happiness. But I tell people that they have to take active control of their lives and active control of their happiness. And, one of the things they can be doing, I know you're a big advocate for profit first, is getting out of your own way with money. Like money won't necessarily buy you happiness, but the absence of money will take away from your happiness. You don't have it, it's stressing you out all the time. And I've been there back in 2009 when we had our last little financial crisis. I owned 4 businesses in 3 different states, and things were not going well. And it affected my psychology, it affected my physical health. And I still have ramifications from those impacts today on my physical health. I have foods that I can't eat because my body reacts to them back from that time frame. So that's, I think, one of the big things is, thinking about, and even the framing about, like, if you want more money, why do you want that money? What's important about that money? Part of that should be sufficiency, right? Just knowing that you have enough to get by. That's a different number for all of us. But there's a whole other piece about, like, well, I'll be happy when I'm rich. Well, the science says that you'll be a little bit happier when you're rich, but you're delaying your happiness. So be happy now. And that's actually more impactful to your success than what a lot of people think.
It is. So let's just talk about this, because you said 40% of happiness is within our control.
Yep.
So what's the other 60%?
50% is genetic. And so you kind of come in with kind of a set range or a set point of how happy you start out. And that's malleable, that changes, and we can control that through intentional action. If you start out pessimistic because you have really pessimistic parents, you can override that through this process called neuroplasticity, which is the rewiring of your brain that you do through these intentional choices and actions. That's about 50%. And then the other part of that 60% that you asked about is circumstance. And so we have these massive data sets from people around the world. And because of those data sets and how rich they are, we can look at all of the factors within people's life circumstances, and we can tease out how much they impact their happiness. So wealth can affect your happiness. Now, if you live in an incredibly poor country and you're making $3 per day, and you need $5 a day so that you can buy a piece of chicken and have protein in your diet, that change in money has a dramatic increase in your overall health and your happiness. And we get to a point where we kind of flatline on that median income, and it doesn't really make us measurably happier. It makes us measurably happier, but not in the big chunks that we think it will. But in that whole 10% is that, it's money, it's what religion you are, it's what orientation you are, it's what age you are, what country you live in, what age bracket you're in, if you're married or single, how educated you are. All of those life circumstances combined all together, that's the important part. All of those things together really only account for 10% of the variability for how happy we are. So we put a lot of influence on "I'll be happy when" kind of statements, and they really don't affect our happiness as much as we think.
That's interesting. I mean, if it's so little, then clearly we need to focus on the other 90.
Focus on the 40. I mean, you can't control the genetic piece, right? Well, you could probably control that with some genetic modification, but
well, so that's the question. What happens if you're genetically born unhappy, so to speak?
Yeah.
Are you just stuck?
No. And again, that goes back to that process of neuroplasticity. So you might start with a lower spot, right? So if you come from really miserable parents, and I don't mean this in a joking way, come from parents with depression, or that people that start out really low, that can be heritable, right? That can transition or translate over to you and how happy you start out. And then what you choose to do on top of that is how much you can raise that up. Now, will you be as happy as some people? Some people are wired to be happy all the time, right? And some of us are in between. And we use the scale of like -10 for people that are severely depressed, +10 for people that are elated and joyful. Now, what's weird is that you can stay in this hole of -10, right? You can be depressed and you may be stuck in that hole. We can treat that. We know how to do that through psychology, and we have a lot of success with that. When we think about these +10 moments, these moments of joy and elation, they're fleeting. They are not meant to be how we feel all the time. And we can beat ourselves up for saying, oh, well, that felt so great. Why don't I feel that way all the time? You're not meant to feel that way all the time. Neurochemically, it's not available to you. Your brain doesn't want you to be happy all the time. Your brain wants you to feel good after doing something perceived as good for your survival. And then your brain wants you to go do the next thing that's going to help you continue to improve and survive. So we feel good by doing something, and then we come back to our set point in between, our level of contentment, whatever that is.
So we can't be always happy.
You can't be always elated and joyful.
Okay.
How's that? Yeah, is that better? So ideally, between these moments of feeling +10 and feeling great about things, you come back to some moment, and in that quiet space, you can just say, how do I feel about my life? Am I content with what's going on in my life, both in the scale of like today, this week, and this month, this year, this decade? That's the framing that I think is more helpful for people when we think about happiness.
So the 40% we can control.
Yeah.
What are the factors within that?
Yeah, positive psychology talks about really 5 domains within that we can control. The easy one that we all think about when we think about happiness is positive feelings, right? We can have positive feelings, but again, they're feelings. Feelings are fleeting, and it's okay. But if you can understand what things in your life create the patterns where you feel good, you can create more of those patterns in your life. And also, addition by subtraction, what things pull away from your happiness, what things take away from your happiness. And then how do you remove those things from your life so that those patterns don't repeat as frequently as well? So that's one element. The second one is called engagement or flow. And that's the state of like being completely immersed in the things that you're doing. It's really good for your brain. It's really good for your productivity to get in those moments of flow state. Michael Jordan called it being in the zone. The third element is relationships. We should really invest in and create and cultivate positive relationships in our lives. Meaning is a big important part of it. That's what I put into the hard parts of happiness, of having this like meaning. And what are you doing? What's your sense of belonging? What's the connection to something bigger than just yourself? And then achievement. And that's the last part of the model from positive psychology. We should be working on achievement.
Is achievement, is that like, I don't know if it's the right word, but significance, like success? Or is achievement not necessarily tied to, oh, I have to be, at the top of the company or this wealthy or those types of factors? Is it a different type of a achievement?
Yeah, I mean, I think your definition of success is what's important. And so for a lot of people, it doesn't mean being the CEO. Not everybody can be the CEO without some sort of a coup. And so success or achievement can be about just mastery and growth and developing. And that can be in all phases of life. It could be that, I do fun things away from here that trigger those positive emotions in my life. I'm part of an improv group, right? That makes people laugh. That makes me feel good. I get good feelings from that. And there's an opportunity for growth in that performing of improv, right? Like doing it really well takes work. It takes effort. You have to work on that growth and mastery. And it doesn't always feel good. There's this process called challenge stress of like challenging yourself to do something that doesn't feel good in the moment. And that's okay. That's that process of strategic discomfort that comes with growth. So it can be growth in a lot of ways. It can be being better as a leader. It can be being better as a workplace employee and developing your expertise or your niche. It could be becoming a better nonprofit director. It could be a better parent, a better spouse, a better sibling, a better child, whatever those things would be. All those kind of fit into that achievement piece under the model.
As we look at this, you said you were drawn to the science. So can you share the science behind this and how that works?
Well, the science has really distilled it down into that PERMA model that I talked about before. That's their acronym within it. And so it's really basically taking that and then call it the well-being theory. And underneath of the well-being theory, put theory at the top, and then break that theory into different parts. And those are those different 5 parts that we talked about. And then within each of those parts, there's different tools and techniques and things that you can be doing to enhance any of those aspects of your overall well-being or your happiness. And that's where it comes from.
Okay. Well, I think what I was more referring to was the chemical changes.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And how that gets affected and how that all works within happiness.
Yeah. So your brain is constantly rewiring itself. And the phrase that I really like here is neurons that fire together, wire together. And so if you can start connecting the dots between some of those different aspects of your happiness, then you're rewiring your brain and you can be creating more of those positive experiences in your life. Example, it's tied back to, purpose and even money. I just got a raise at work. I got a $10,000 raise at work based on performance, based on merit. I now have more money. I can choose to do a lot of things with that money. By the way, the science will tell you to invest that money in experiences versus investing that money in things, because things don't make us happy as long as experiences do. So I'm going to take a portion of that $10,000 and I'm going to put some of it right into a savings account because I know that's what I should be doing with some of my money. That's a third of it. I'm going to spend a third of it. I'm going to put it into my bank account and I'm going to use that money for something fun. And I'm going to give a third of that money over to a nonprofit to do good things. Now, that's pretty generous. Most people only do it at about 10% because we're tithing, right? Now, if you can invest some of those monies in fun things, great. But here's what you need to be doing to kind of celebrate what you did because your brain habituates to what's going on. You just got this raise, you just got this money, you just put some of that money away and you're going to use some of this money for something fun. The first thing you need to do is celebrate, right? Because you just did something really cool. It fits in with that PERMA model under achievement. You just did some hard things and achieved and did things that other people couldn't do. And that's why you got honored for that. And you need to celebrate that because your brain wants to move on again to the next thing. And so by stopping and saying, hey, I just did a good thing. I just got this big raise. I just got this bonus check. I just did this thing of achievement that was really good for me to do, and I'm glad I did that. I'm looking forward to doing the next thing and achieving the next thing, but I'm going to celebrate this now. And by doing that and actually celebrating it, maybe sitting down and having yourself a little glass of champagne or whatever that thing is, or buying yourself a nice lunch and just taking a moment to be present with that, you're stimulating those positive feelings that could have otherwise been like, oh, that was a good feeling, and there it went, and it's gone. And so how do we celebrate and how do we put positive energy around that so that we continue to do those things and create this self-fulfilling positive cycle?
How many people do you think actually think about all of this? Think about happiness, think about purpose, and are clear maybe on some of those factors and how to pull those levers?
14%. I don't know. I have no idea. I just made up a number for you, Rocky. I don't know. It's a really good question, and I think that's the thing that's available to all of us is like having this better understanding of how this works. And when I say how this works, I'm pointing to my brain of like how this thing works and how we can be the ones to reshape how this thing works for us or against us. That's the opportunity for us to better understand how this brain really works, to understand kind of the ancestral wiring that's built into it and how that holds us back, how it supports us, but how it also can hold us back in the modern day world. And then how we can intentionally use our brains to make us happy and then make us, more successful and whatever those things are.
It's interesting. I've been reading a lot about this and, it's always the chicken and the egg story. And maybe in this case, it's both ways. There seems to be a considerable tie-in to our physical presence and our mental presence. So when you look at somebody, you can tell if they're depressed. Right? You might not know. You can walk down the street and see who's angry. Does the physical come before the mental, or does the mental drive the physical, or how is that back and forth happen?
That's a really good question. I struggle with answering specifically the chicken or the egg piece part of it, like which one really comes first. I know that, movement is really important for, like, we can do things to change our physiology, or to energize our physiology to make ourselves happier. And what we know about people that are happy and also long living is they move a lot. And I don't mean like they go run marathons. That's not the point behind this. They do little things like tending to a garden, and they walk more often than they get in their car, and all those little things that get your body moving and get your body feeling good. I do think that if you are physically impaired, like you have like chronic back issues, I've had that before, right? That took away from my happiness. It was really hard to be positive and happy when I was in physical pain and suffering. And I can speak to it from my own experience of having a depressive episode back in about 2010, where I didn't know what was going on. I was in that super stressful environment, and it broke my physiology. My physical body broke down because I wasn't sleeping well. My body was super reactive to everything that was going on. It affected my psychology. Fortunately, it worked itself out, and I wish I would have known what it was then, because I stayed kind of down in a dark place that I was struggling for a while, and I didn't really understand what it was. I couldn't put a label on it. But I can see, certainly there's a connection between the physiology and the psychology. The chicken or the egg part, that's a tough one, and it's not one I can speak to from my own expertise.
And I don't know that there is an answer. I just know that there is a tie-in between the two, and maybe it depends on the situation, that sometimes our thoughts make our body angry, and sometimes our body being in an angry state makes our mind angry. I don't know for sure how, and maybe science will one day figure some of these things out.
I think you captured it really well there. I mean, I think you captured it well enough to say that if our body's upset, it's going to trigger more negative emotions, right? Fight or flight being the easiest one for most of us to understand, is that when we are triggered in some way, that it affects our ability to perform. It affects our brain's performance as well, right? Because when we're in fight or flight mode, our brain shuts down the cognitive functions, and it quits worrying about processing through. Like, we have this incredible supercomputer in the front portion of our brain, and we have in the back of our brain our limbic system. And that's the old reptilian brain. That's the fight or flight brain. And when the fight or flight brain is turned on, we quit thinking about other people. We really are worried about our own survival at that point. And so you're turning off that portion of your brain. So it affects your performance, right? Like, if you're constantly stressed out, you're not doing your clearest of thinking, right? You're basically in a bad state. So I can certainly see it happening that way. And I can certainly see back of, like, if you're stressed out, you're affecting your own physiology as well, right? That the stress actually has real value. Being bathed in stress all the time is terrible for you. We know that. So I think you got it. I think you figured it out. The answer is chicken and egg. Not chicken or egg.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. And I don't know how true or useful it is, but if you see that you're in a particular state, and maybe that's why moving helps, because if you get out of that state physically, maybe then you can drive the mental state to follow it.
I agree with that. And movement isn't the only thing you have to do, but there are some tools related to movement that get you basically out of your head and destimulate your brain, that get you back in your body. And so just even like right now, you're sitting down, I'm sitting down, stop for a second and feel your weight in the chair. Right? You can feel that. You just put your attention somewhere else. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel your hands on the table, right? What you're doing is you're diverting your attention away from that. You're just taking that kind of chaos that's swirling and you're bringing the volume down on that. And those are easy tools to do. We do that a little bit through movement too. And we're talking about it being in the stressful environment. When I'm like in a low energy state, I live right by the Deschutes River here in Bend, Oregon, where I live, and I go outside. I go outside, I go for a walk. It's not a strenuous walk. It's generally flat terrain along the river. It's really pretty. I get to put my attention on the outside. I get to be appreciative and grateful for what's around me. I come back energized, right? And that's the little bits of movement that we can give ourselves from time to time that help.
What are some other ways to get out of our head?
Well, what we just talked about with the, feeling your fingers, like literally I'm holding up, and I know you and I are on video right now, but just rubbing your fingers together and feeling that. Feeling your breath, the rising and falling of your breath, right? These are mental fitness tools. They're also mindfulness tools. You're interrupting those patterns and you're just kind of destimulating your brain from those patterns. A movement's a really good thing. And then also just kind of recognizing, we have these patterns of self-sabotage we can get into where we can stress triggers us and we do these things and we just kind of go back to the default thing that we've always done that's gotten us through those situations. And if you can start putting labels on that and understanding what that is, then you can be like, oh, that's what I'm doing. There's that label on that thing I'm doing that's getting in my way. And so how do I stop doing that? And some of that is just awareness, right? Like it's really hard. Like I'm looking at you across from me right now. I don't really know what's going on in your head. And you are doing a fine job of smiling and laughing at my jokes. Thank you, Rocky. But you could be swirling any sorts of things in your head, right? And so basically what we wind up sharing through our lips, and communication is the one form of communication, right? The actual words we use. But there's a lot of intent behind words. And so it's really hard to kind of get into other people's heads. And it's really kind of hard to know what's normal within our own heads and then how to say, oh, this is a pattern that I should be interrupting. This isn't really valuable. This is not the normal way of approaching the situation. And that's super tough. You have to do a lot of introspective work to get there. I think it's worth it. I think it's worth every bit of it.
Do many people do that work?
I'll use 14% again. I don't know. I think that's everyone's individual journey to figure that stuff out. And, I think the more that we can create, some fluency around our emotions, and Brene Brown says this really, really well. She said, in my household, when I grew up, we were only allowed to have two emotions, joy and anger. There was nothing else in between. And, we have such a wide range of emotions. And if we could put more fluency around those things and understand kind of like, well, I'm angry. Why do I feel angry? Unpack that. What's below all of those things? Oh, there's fear. Oh, why is there fear there? Oh, I'm worried about this and this and that. This could, there's a lot of that we have to spend some time to try to understand the cascading pieces that are underneath that lead to this focal point of being really angry. And so how far people go in their own effort in investing that, I don't know. I use a professional coach that helps me work on the future. I use a therapist to help me unravel the past, and I don't have I'm not heavily impacted by my past in where I'm in a bad state of being. But it's more just oh, that's where that comes from. And we talked about in the beginning, that scarcity mindset that I started out with. The early youth, the significance of what happens to you in your youth before age 18, the studies behind that are significant. And we know about these adverse childhood experiences as being really detrimental to our physical health and our mental health in adulthood, even though they happened to us when we were kids. And so I think you've got to figure out how much time you need to invest in that to get out of your own way and live a happy life.
Let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
When you say the things that happened to us in childhood,
yeah,
how does that affect us later in life? And what can we do about it?
Well, first of all, the big framing on this is bad things can happen to you in your childhood, and they are not a life sentence. Are they harder to overcome than things that happen to you later in life? Yes, because over your lifetime as an adult, you're more resilient. You're kind of wired at this point, right? You are who you are to a degree, and bad things can happen to you. And you can say, well, I've been through hard stuff before. I've been resilient in earlier years, and I can get through this thing too, right? And so as we build up our resiliency, we can overcome bigger and bigger hurdles. In our early childhood, our brain wires things in our brain really hard or really significant. And remember when I said earlier about the neurons that fire together, wire together? They fire together and they wire together. And then what we do is we have all these neural networks in our brain, and they go in all different directions. And some of them are connected to different things. And we can reshape those neurons. They literally reconnect in our brain to other neurons as we create new experiences and new emotions that come from those new experiences. We can do that intentionally, right? Like, I got a raise. I'm going to celebrate that raise. I celebrated that raise. It makes me feel good to get that good. I'm going to keep working on success. That's a good thing, right? In our early childhood, we have all these neural connections. And if you can think about them as like little capillaries, like really thin little strands. In our childhood, we myelinate those. We put down basically a conductor around those things. And instead of having these little channels and capillaries or these little alleys and these little tiny fibers, we make those into superhighways. And we make these really strong pathways that we have to work to break those down. So they stick with us for a while. And what we know about the work from, it's called ACEs, is the survey index. And if you just interview out there, and I can put it in the show notes, about adverse childhood experiences, you can look at what happened to you during your childhood, and then you can work on intervening from those things. Now, some of those things have happened to you, right? I talked about my childhood in poverty. My parents being divorced, that's a score on the ACEs survey. It's a 1 point, right? Just having a fractured childhood of parents breaking up, having instability, having lack of food or clean clothing or any of those things, points. Experience of mental health issues within your family or drug abuse, points, right? They start adding up. What can really be impactful to you either at that time or now is having positive interventions, right? So my parents were divorced, but my mom was always in my life, still loving parent. My dad was always in my life, loving parent. He remarried, stepmother, loving stepmother. Paternal grandparents, incredibly impactful as people that set really high expectations for me, that loved me unconditionally. Those are all positive interventions that can help alleviate what could be some of the physical and mental elements that can come from having those high ACEs scores. And then the other part is to say, okay, like, I can't ignore these things. They did happen to me. I'm going to actually give them enough value to say that they're not a life sentence, but there's something I should pay attention to, and I should work to alleviate the potential impacts from those things.
And I guess a big part of it is actually facing it and understanding it, in the sense that I think a lot of people might just bury it.
Right. Facing it and understanding it. I really like that, Rocky. That's great.
Interesting.
Face it, understand it, and then work on it.
And then work. Well, that's questioning it, right? Sure. Constantly questioning. Well, it's understanding. The easiest way I'll explain it is you're creating those pathways. It's understanding you just hit a pathway unconsciously. Oh, I set the pathway off again. Interesting. It's causing X, Y, Z in the way I'm reacting today to something that may have totally nothing to do with it.
Default reaction to something versus intentional choice. Look at it like that. Being like, here's the thing I've always done. Here's the way I've always behaved. Does this serve me? And is this the thing that I need to be doing to live the life that I want to live, starting here and then going forward? You can fix some of the things that happened in the past by resolving things that are out there. But what you control is what's right here in front of you and how that impacts the future.
How hard is it to rewire those pathways?
Yeah, it depends on the severity of it. So if something was really intense and really emotional and really repetitive, then those things are hardwired into us. And so it just really depends on what that looks like. It's unique to all of us. The whole process of neuroplasticity, minimum of sort of 21 days to kind of like rewire something that's going on with you. And it doesn't have to be a big thing, like this big emotional change that you make in what you're doing. Go back to this thing about getting a $10,000 bonus check. What are you going to do with that? Well, the old version of you, like the old version of me, and this is what I had to work through, is being like, there was never enough money around. So when money came in, we spent it. My mom got paid every other week. And the week that she got paid, we went out, we had fun, we did good things, and then the week after, when we were waiting for the next check, we had a lot of ramen noodle. And I don't mean the good ramen noodle. I mean the ones that came in the packet, And so there's this cyclical nature of like, when the money's here, spend it, because it won't be here tomorrow. And so I have to think about, even when that $10,000 comes in, like, what am I doing with that serves me today, that provides me with happiness and contentment in my life now, And it also provides for the future as well. I don't need to use and spend all this money here today because there will be more tomorrow. And that's me kind of getting out of my own way. And when I make that decision and when I go into my account for my investment and I start pushing some money away, profit first, right? I push money away into those things. I have to stop and say to myself, this is a good thing. This is a very tactical and thoughtful and mature and the way that you want to behave with the money that you have versus just being like, I have $10,000, new motorcycle. That's not the way to behave with that money. I still would like the motorcycle.
It's funny because I've been studying this and these behaviors almost seem counter to logic. Like you would think if somebody grew up in poverty that they'd want to hold on to more money. But the fact that they grew up in poverty actually makes them more spendthrift.
I don't know that to be the case as an absolute sort of statement.
Nothing's absolute.
Yeah, right. 14%, I can make it up again. I think different people develop different patterns. And I don't understand which of those, like you said, either some people will just spend it all because it won't be here tomorrow. That's kind of how I was explaining myself to like an extreme degree. That's not really how I behaved or behave now. And then some people will save it all and not spend any of the money on anything. They're going to hoard that money and they're going to protect that money because those are two extreme examples. Most of us are probably some mix in between or whatever that would be, right? So whatever pattern that we've created that created the positive feedback loop in our brain of what to do in that situation is the pattern we need to examine and the pattern we potentially need to break. Some of these patterns are good. Some of these patterns are bad. Some of these are just automatic. And so the automatics are not necessarily the best patterns. They're just the automatic pattern because our brains are incredibly lazy and our brains want to do the thing that we've always done before because it's worked and it's got us here. But it's maybe not always the highest and best choice.
And so the first step is recognizing the pattern, questioning whether or not the pattern is serving you or not serving you, getting out of most people. I'm not going to ask you what percent, but I will say that most people are asleep. And by asleep, what I mean is that they are unconscious of all this going on. They're just in default mode.
And it's pretty normal for us to do that, right? Introspection is something that we have to take. It takes energy. It takes attention. It makes us think about the here and the now, right? When we're all very busy with thinking about all the other things, right? And so I think you nailed it. And then what can you do then to take that default pattern that was and turn it into the default pattern that you want it to be and just making it easy, like removing the friction points to do those things that you want to be doing in life. Example. I came home last night and it was cold outside. It was snowing outside where I live here. And I didn't want to go outside and go for a walk. But I was like, I am always so much happier when I walk down by that river at night. So I did. I put some headphones on. I put on enough clothes to stay warm. And I had a lovely walk last night. It changed my attitude. My attitude was in a fine place before that. But we have to make those actions, right? And we have to find what the friction points there are. It's cold. I don't want to go outside. And then I'm like, yeah, and you have a really nice pair of warm boots. Put them on. Long johns. Put them on. Jacket. Put them on. Hat. Put them on. Scarf. Put it on. Go walk outside because you know you're going to be happy doing that. And if we can remove those friction points in there for all of those things, and the friction's point being cold, I can't control the weather. If I can ever get to that point, I'll also make a tree that just prints money. But you're examining what things get in the way from those behaviors that you want is where you can help ease those intentional actions that you make.
I'm wondering if we can use technology to cheat. In other words, could you put on a pair of VR goggles and go for a walk around your living room in warmth and get the same feeling? Because a lot of what's coming out, especially, I look at it on the marketing side, they're like, the brain can't tell.
Sometimes, for sure. I don't know. I don't know enough about the, I'm not a digital guy. I'm analog when it comes to my movement. So I actually go move and I go outside. So I think you miss out. Certainly movement of any sort is really helpful. Just getting up and walking around fine. There's added health benefits of just getting outside, of forest bathing, sunlight, vitamin D, even exposure that, this whole process of they call it forest bathing. Have you heard of this term? I've
heard of the term, but why don't you go ahead and share with the audience?
Yeah. like going outside and bathing in the forest, and some of it, and I can't think of the guy's name, picking up hands of dirt and like inhaling the dirt, like you're actually replenishing your guts, fungal and bacterial composition, because we used to do that all the time. We used to be outside. We used to have our hands in the dirt. We used to have to move and make things and build things. And all of those little things were good for us to be exposed to the world. Now, are there bad things in the dirt? Yes. Don't go to a public park where there's a encaged or enclosed pet area and do that with the dirt there. That's a bad idea for your health. But we've interrupted some of these natural things that put us outside more. So I would still lean towards that. And if VR goggles is your only option because you live in the city, fine.
I agree with you getting out, and it does make a difference. And I think it's kind of almost like a grounding and connection to the universe. And I think that's part of when you get into a busy world, that's what you lose and you forget about. And we were talking about that before we hit record of just when you live inside a pressure cooker, you don't realize that you're doing that. And most people can't see a way out.
Yeah. And you get stuck in that pattern, right? And so the idea is to just interrupt all these things and just do these things with awareness. And I didn't even say this before, but part of why I go outside, and especially why I like to go outside at night, is to go look at the night sky. And if I can't go look at the night sky, to watch a beautiful sunset and to find the beauty in nature and the complexity in nature. It connects you to something bigger, and whatever you don't have to be religious to be spiritual. Just a connection to something bigger than yourself, right? And for me, I go out and look at the night sky because it reminds me that if I'm lucky, I'm getting 100 years on this earth, and I've already used 50 of them. And so what am I going to do with the other if I get 50? We're not guaranteed tomorrow. And so and I don't live this like carpe diem where I'm just going out and being foolish, with my behavior every day. I'm foolish about 3 days a week for sure. But it's about this connection to something bigger. I'm looking up at the night sky is really helpful for me to stop and to look and to think and to recognize, and then to help kind of get away from this worrisome human nature of worried about what's right in front of me.
I'm assuming you haven't found any UFOs.
Well, no, but I have been freaked out a few times by Starlink when it goes over. Have you been able to see that where you live?
Our biggest problem is light pollution. So we still can see. And it's funny because I think about a week ago, I grill a lot. So I go out on the back deck, and our back deck goes out and overlooks the woods. So it's darker that way.
Yeah. Right.
And there's been these two things hanging out in the sky to the left. And I'm like, I don't know what those are. They're too low to be stars. They're too bright for whatever. So I don't know what they are. Sometimes they can't be.
There's two planets that are really close. They call them kissing planets right now. Yeah.
They're low on the horizon?
Oh, yeah. It just really depends on where the visible light comes through for us to see those.
Okay. Well, then they're planets. Sometimes I see other lights moving in the sky.
I don't want this turning into a conspiracy theory podcast. I don't think that's what you're trying to do here.
No, not at all. Not at all. It was kind of a joke because, everyone's looking at Chinese balloons and UFOs, right. And it's just kind of hilarious that all of that's going on. Have you done any research into breath work?
Breath work has the intentional triggering of I've done some of the sessions and they're really energizing. I definitely don't understand the why behind it. I think you're hyper oxidating your body, right? You're intentionally bringing in a lot of that. Does it make you put all of your energy into doing that because it's really hard to hold those patterns? Yes, it's really hard. So if nothing else, it pulls your mind away from the present moment of all the things you're thinking about and just gets you really into your body and just destimulates you from all the stuff you're thinking about. Breath work, the stuff that I know about is more about these acts of mental fitness and mindfulness, about just calming your body, feeling the movement, getting out of your head and back into your body. All of those things are really powerful. And the way that I look at it, and this is the thing that I think people get stuck on when we talk about breath work and meditation. And that's what I like about mental fitness, is just saying, all we're trying to do is give you tools to recognize these patterns you're in, and then to destimulate these patterns so you just kind of can break them really easily. And so when we're talking about even these tools that we were before, feet on the floor, feel your weight in your chair, feel your fingertips. I'm feeling little burrs and dry spots on my fingertips, right? I'm oh, what's going on? It just takes my attention away from all the stuff that's spinning around in my head and all the noise that's in my head. And we're taking the volume on that noise in my head and turning it from an 8 down to a 3. And I can go right back to what I was doing. And if you do any of these activities, you can do them in 2 minutes. It doesn't really take 2 hours of meditation to get the physical benefits and then the mental fitness benefits of doing that work.
You've mentioned profit first a few times throughout the conversation. So that's something that you use in your business. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's helped you?
Yeah, sure. I love that it's the foundation for the work that you do. Three things happened to me all at the same time that I think were really important. I left my career in nonprofits. I started doing my own business at that time, and I finally had a profit. Right. So I had extra money to do something with. And if you've ever worked for nonprofits or know people that work for nonprofits, it's not just the nonprofit that's non-profitable. It's you that can be non-profitable too, because it's you don't get paid very well. And that was part one. So I had a profit. 2, I had a coach. And I had a coach that helped me kind of get out of like my patterns of thinking and in my own ways of undermining myself, and help me question those things and create that pattern of introspection, like looking at things, patterns, and trying to understand them and saying, is that the pattern I want? If not, what are we going to do different? And then the third thing that happened is I had a wealth manager come into my life. And the wealth manager said, I don't need you to do anything big things with your money. We're just going to create some good habits with you. I think you'll like this book, Profit First. And it created just an easy way for me to say, all right, I have some money coming in. I don't need to spend all the money that's coming in. I don't need to live up to that threshold of income. What can I do with these things to make it easier for me to do? And that's where I set up some money market accounts, and I get able to push that money away and just do that and create this habit of when the money comes in, you push the money into other places. And so that's kind of my first experience with Profit First. And I've been using it for a few years now. So it's just really funny that we're talking about this today, talking about other stuff today. And I was like, oh, Rocky does Profit First stuff. I love Profit First. It changed my relationship with money.
And it's funny because it's literally, it's a money behavioral system.
Yeah, right.
To change the way we think about something into a different way. So it's changing the pattern interrupt. And it's simple to do so that it's easily automatable, and it takes the emotion out of it. I think the biggest thing I've seen is business owners struggle to pay themselves or know how much to pay themselves. And here it's defined for you. So you don't have to think about it.
That's like, I pay for expertise for different things too. Like if I can just do one thing of like pay myself, have my own money, and then have other people to advise me on what to do with that money once I start putting it in other places, that's really valuable. So it's helpful for me to kind of like create, like I liked what you called it, pattern interrupts, like interrupt the old way of doing things, create these new habits. And when you're doing those things, like I told you, I go into my account, I start transferring money. When I do that, I'm literally saying, hey, good job. This is what you need to be doing. Good job. Like, and I give myself a little high five. Like I high five myself for doing those things. And that's part of that neuroplasticity process of saying, these are good behaviors. These are behaviors I want to reinforce. I'm going to make myself feel good for choosing these behaviors. And then you're more likely to do them again and again. Yeah. The easier you can make that for yourself with all of these things, like removing all those friction points or all those things that require energy and effort, you're doing yourself a big favor.
How has working with a coach helped you?
Well, kind of back to what we were talking about before, of just like talking through things. I could be stuck on things, or I could just be curious about things, or I could be telling myself stories. And it's just really good to examine those stories that you tell yourself with someone else. I can say, oh, that is a fictional story. Like that is not a story grounded in reality. Why do you think that about yourself? Why do you think that about the situation? Get out of your own way with that. Put that story to bed, and then create the nonfiction version that's maybe less exciting. But that is the true story. And so it's just really helped me kind of say, like, we talked about the imposter syndrome before, about taking that imposter and just saying, is the imposter right? Where's the imposter right on occasion? Where's the imposter wrong? And getting that out of the way. And that was a big help for me. Still use coach.
Interesting. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
Ooh, that's a big question. That's bigger than the chicken and the egg question that you asked me before, and making me answer percentages that I didn't know. I think we have to be really cautious that the human brain always wants us to chase the next thing. We're wired to do that, and I think abundance is all around us. So I spend a good bit of time intentionally being grateful for what I have. And if you can recognize all the great things that you have in your life, you can be happier and more content in the life that you have, and see that abundance around you. But our brain's always wiring us to go find and see the next thing and chasing that. And so we just have to kind of stop every once in a while and say, hey, how about all these cool things that are in my life right now? That's great. I can only strive for more, but I should be grateful for what I have now.
I liken that to climbing a mountain. If you're always looking at the peak, you're always like, oh, it's so far away. But if you turn around and you look at the view from halfway up the mountain, you're like, wow, I've come pretty far. This is pretty cool. Not bad at all.
I have to do that for myself. I can have some tendencies towards this glass half empty piece, and I have to stop. And I have to give myself evidence of showing myself the progress I've made sometimes. So it's helpful for me to do those things. That's great. Love that.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
How good looking I am. Let's see. What's my real answer there? I think that everyone around me has things they're struggling with, and that just because you're struggling with something, and I don't even mean in a big way, like this flawed thing, this Instagram life of everybody's perfect. It's just a lie, and the few fortunate people that I think they're just completely content with all the things in their life all the time, I'm happy those people have that for themselves, and I still have other stuff that I want to work on in my life, and it's okay. I can be a whole person as I work towards growing as a person as well.
I think that was my biggest aha when I joined a mastermind group of high performing people and realizing, oh, they have lots of problems too.
We have this fallacy of people at the top being flawless and omnipotent, and they're just not, and I think that the world and the workplaces are coming around to say inclusive leaders are the leaders that really can accomplish a lot more than thinking that they are in their shiny white castle on the hill and that they're the model of perfection.
And actually one of the biggest things that came out of that, and it's kind of what you talked about, is how childhood trauma is still affecting them later in life. And how many of them aren't even aware. Some of them are aware, some are not aware until much, much later. If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Ooh, that is a really good question. These are good questions, Rocky. You don't have to know all the answers to the life that you want to shape yet. And I think that I'll put some people into the category of the fortunate few that have known exactly what they're doing with their life and have a plan from the age of 18 all the way through till death. If they really do have that plan, I really question the authenticity of that. But I think it's we put so much pressure on an 18-year-old to know everything about what they're supposed to be choosing for their life going forward. And I just think that's it's just a terrible burden to put on an 18-year-old. Our brains aren't even fully formed as 18-year-olds, especially boys. I don't even know if boys get fully formed brains in their 50s, but so yeah, I just think that give yourself the grace to say, this is what I'm doing now, and if this doesn't serve me anymore, I'm going to let it go.
It's learning to let go. I think too many people get put on a train track and they don't realize that they don't have to be on that track.
I like that. Train track, right? Yeah.
If people would like to learn more about you and your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I already told you how handsome I am, so I'm a raging narcissist. And in that vein of thinking, my website is my name, anthonypoponi.com. So they can just go there and find out all about me. And there's a lot of really great resources on there, including a bunch of free stuff. And so I really would love to help people. One of those is about stress. You talked about the emotion that gets in our way of making some of these decisions. And one of them is about the big three forms of stress that kind of manifest themselves in ways. If we can kind of, again, starting to identify those patterns, interrupt them, get them out of the way, we can move on with things. And so that's a free resource on my website. That would be at anthonypoponi.com/get happy now. Get happy now. Perfect thing to do. Thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, thanks, Rocky. I appreciate you having me on.
Are you ready to go outside? To get into nature? Seems like a recurrent theme. Take a little bit of time to dig into your reactions and why you react the way you do. I've been spending a lot of time examining the voices in my head and the rabbit trails it takes me on. Reprogramming is never done. Every time you peel a layer, the next one opens up. The reality is money scripts run deep for people, as do other scripts that were created in childhood. The question you have to ask is, do they still serve you? Spring is here. It's a little bit warmer. Go take the walk. If something from your childhood is holding you back from what you want, then take the time to explore it. Sometimes we need outside help. Having a coach is also awesome to help us push through our limiting beliefs. If you enjoyed today's episode and know someone else who would, I would appreciate you sharing it with them. Maybe post it on social media. Next week, we've got Jeremy Straub to talk about creating success in life. I know you're going to love it. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.